Today we're going to go over the amendments in the U.S. Constitution. So there are quite a few amendments, so we are going to kind of go through this a little quickly. There's not as many as you might think. So remember, the amendments to the Constitution, this is usually what covers our rights as citizens and some of the major laws that other smaller laws can fall under. So we're going to go over each amendment, and over this next unit, we're going to be covering some of them a little more in depth, but this is just going to be an introduction to the amendments. So first of all, what is an amendment? This should be reviewed because we covered it a little bit at the beginning of the year. But what's important to know is that these are in the Constitution. They are an addition or a change to the Constitution. Okay, so when the Constitution was first written, there were a few amendments that were written in the Constitution initially. Every amendment that has come since has been an addition, or they have changed something in the Constitution. They've changed an amendment. They provide rights and or restrictions to citizens in the U.S. And these need to go through the legislative branch. So if there is a new amendment and they decide that they want to vote on a big law that should be in the Constitution, it needs to go through the legislative branch, and it needs to be voted on in Congress and passed in Congress in order to be added to the Constitution. There are currently 27 amendments. So the Bill of Rights, those are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. These are the ones that we refer to the most. So the idea of like freedom of speech and the right to bear arms, all of those things. Those are in the Bill of Rights. They're the first 10 amendments. These came with the Constitution when the Constitution was initially written. Amendment 1 and 2. Amendment 1 gives the guarantees freedom of religion, speech, assembly, and the press. We don't have an official religion in the government. Citizens are allowed to criticize the government, and the American press, which means like the news, they are not subject to prior restraint. That is, the government can't censor anything that's happening in the news. Amendment 2 is the right to bear arms, which means that you are allowed to own a weapon if you would like, and that the government cannot take that away. However, that rule can be regulated. So that means that certain things can change so people aren't owning a crazy amount of weapons. Amendment 3 and 4. Amendment 3 prohibits the government from forcing people to provide shelter for soldiers. We went over this when we were talking about the Revolutionary War. Amendment 4, police must have probable cause to carry out an arrest or a search. So they need to have a legitimate reason as to why they feel like they need to arrest somebody or why they need to search your car or your home. And usually that needs to be done with a warrant from a judge. Amendment 5. No one can be tried for a serious crime unless a grand jury has decided there is enough evidence to justify a trial. You cannot be charged twice for the same crime. You can't be forced to testify against yourself or herself. Government cannot deprive any person of the life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So you can't just have your home taken away. There needs to be a court. There needs to be a reason. There needs to be a trial. Amendment 6 guarantees the right to a speedy trial and an impartial jury. And you have the right to a lawyer. Amendment 7 is the right to a trial by jury for disputes about property worth more than $20. Amendment 8, it prohibits excessive bail. It prohibits excessive fines. So if you commit a crime, they can't just fine you $1 million because you committed a small crime. That goes against the amendments. Amendment 9 prohibits all basic or natural rights not specifically noted in the Constitution. Amendment 10 establishes that powers not given to the national government or denied to the states by the Constitution belong to the states or the people. That just means that if there is not a law in the national government, states have the right to create that law to benefit the people within their state. All right, that is the end of the Bill of Rights. But if you remember, there are 27 amendments, so we're going to go over a few more. Amendments 11 and 12. Amendment 11 prohibits the state from being sued in federal court by citizens from another state. Amendment 12 required presidential electors to vote separately for president and for vice president. Amendments 13, 14, and 15, these are created as a result of the Civil War. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment intended to protect the legal rights of the freed slaves and their descendants. Today it protects the rights of citizenships in general, which is good. 15th Amendment prohibits the government from denying a person's right to vote on the basis of race. But then we saw before the Civil Rights Movement, other people put some other laws in place that kind of went against this amendment. Amendment 16, this gave Congress the power to levy individual income taxes. Amendment 17 provided for the election of U.S. senators by direct popular vote. Amendment 18, this outlawed the manufacture, sale, or transportation of alcoholic beverages. So for a long time in the country, you were not allowed to buy alcohol in the United States. That is still part of the Constitution. Amendment 19 is guaranteed women the right to vote. Amendment 20 shortened the time between presidential elections and the inauguration. So it used to be January 20th was Inauguration Day, and it set January 3rd as the date for opening of a new Congress. So it changed the date, so it wasn't going to take as long. Amendment 21, it repealed the 18th Amendment. So if you notice, we still have the 18th Amendment in the Constitution, but Amendment 21 decided to add a new amendment saying we're removing the 18th Amendment. You are allowed to buy alcohol and consume alcohol in this country. Amendment 22 limited the president to 2 full terms in office. Presidents are not allowed to have more than 2 terms. Amendment 23 granted voters in the District of Columbia the right to vote for president and vice president. Until 1961, if you lived in Washington, D.C., you were not allowed to vote for president or vice president. Amendment 24, it outlawed poll taxes. So those would be taxes that were paid in order to vote in federal elections. That came with the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. Amendment 25 provided for succession to the office of the president in the event of death or incapacity and for filling vacancies, the office of the vice president. So in 1967, the vice president, if the president died, would take over as president and would fill in any of the jobs that were open in the cabinet. Amendment 26 extended the right to vote to 18-year-olds. So before 1971, 18-year-olds were not allowed to vote. Amendment 27, it banned Congress from increasing its members' salaries until the next election. So if you were in the middle of your job, you weren't allowed to increase your salary in the middle of the time that you were actually an elected official. And that's all of the amendments.